Clonmel, a prosperous-looking country town in County Tipperary. The streets look busy as cars and pedestrians tackle its narrow old streets. But behind the busy high street, a different story emerges. The town, like many in rural Ireland, is hiding a business desert as the traditional is taken over by the modern in the town's retail world. But the town itself has a unique story to share with the world, one that should inspire the solution to these business problems. The key to that story is on the signs that appear in various parts of the town, and the name is Charles Bianconi. Pat Whelan, a successful local businessman, believes in the inspiration that local history can give to business today.
I think that case study of Charles Bianconi is something that is an asset to this area. It's also an asset to anybody who wants to learn and to understand. And I would challenge ourselves as a community how well we've done that job of actually celebrating what it is he brought to the party a long, long time ago. And I think, it's something that can instill pride into the whole area.
We will now try and tell a portion of this story about this inspirational local businessman, using many of the words of his contemporaries or his own thoughts, recorded after his death by his own surviving child, his daughter Mary.
This book was written at my father's bidding, but for his commands I should not have undertaken the task for which I am hardly fitted. He was proud of his hard-won success in life. He was thankful to God for having blessed his endeavours. He was fond of the people among whom his lot was cast, and with whom he had become one in heart and in spirit.
Joachim Carlo Giuseppe Bianconi, the second son of Pietro and Maria Bianconi, was born on the 24th of September 1786 in Trigolo, a village near Lake Como. He was the second of 3 brothers and 2 sisters.
Charles was sent to the school of the Abbé Radivioli, who had a reputation as a teacher. Young Bianconi did not, however, add to the fame of his master, as he acquired a reputation on his own account, that of being the greatest dunce and boldest boy in the school.
Europe at this time was a dangerous place for young men, with the prospect of conscription into the armies of Napoleon. So staying at home was not really an option without a clear profession or ability. And there was already a habit of sending local sons to London to learn a trade. And so,
in the beginning of the year 1802, during the short peace that followed the Treaty of Amiens, 4 boys and a man left the Lombardy highlands, passed over the Alps, tramped through Switzerland and travelled along the Rhine, making for a northern seaport. The man, Andrea Ferroni by name, had been well paid to bring the 4 boys to London, where arrangements had been made to apprentice them to respectable tradesmen. Ferroni kept the money and took the lads to Ireland instead.
Arriving in Dublin, Ferroni obtained lodgings in Temple Bar, near Essex Street Bridge, and promptly set to work. With the aid of a big fire and moulds, he proceeded to cast a number of leaden frames, in which he fixed pictures he had brought from Italy. And in a few days he sent out Carlo to sell the pictures in the streets, in a city among a people whose language was entirely unknown to him. Charles Dickens, a famous English writer, and visitor to Ireland at least 3 times in the 1800s, takes up the story.
It thus happened that in the summer of 1802, a chubby, bright-eyed, curly-headed, pleasant-faced Italian boy, some 15 years of age, was to be seen wandering about the streets of Dublin, selling cheap prints in leaden frames. All the English the little fellow knew was buy, and when asked the price, he had to count the number of pennies on his fingers.
When the local market was oversold, the now Charles Bianconi was sent further afield.
I soon learned a little English, and then I was sent off into the country every Monday morning with £2 worth of these pictures, and 4p allowed me for pocket money, on the understanding that I was expected home on the following Saturday evening. When we had quite beaten all the country around about Dublin, I was ordered to Waterford and Wexford.
Walking everywhere for most people was the only way to travel. If you were rich, you might have a horse, or even a horse and cart, but as a Catholic, you could not own a good horse over £5 value. The canals were far too expensive for Charles, so walking great distances was the only way to go.
At the expiration of 18 months, which was to have been the period of my exile, if I had so willed it, he declared himself ready to fulfill his engagement with my father and take me back to him. My pride was so mortified that I declined his offer.
Faroni restored the lad his freedom, and what was perhaps as valuable, his purse containing 100 louis d'or. With this capital, stout limbs and a light heart, Charles Bianconi began the work on his own account. He produced a deal box, filled it with prints, stopped it on his shoulders, and became a peddler.
With this pack on my back, which weighed over £100, I have frequently walked from 20 to 30 miles in the day. I was then 17 years old.
He was astonished at the dram drinking of the men and the pipe smoking of the women. The violent faction fights which took place at the fairs which Bianconi used to frequent were of a kind which he had never before experienced among the Pacific people of North Italy.
I began to think seriously that I was not in my right position in society, and that I was incapable of putting myself right. These ideas embarrassed me much, as did the kindness of many of my customers, who recommended the curly-headed Italian boy to their friends as having the cheapest pictures and the greatest quantity of them.
He seems to have had the gift to befriend people and to win people's trust. Like we know that when he came to Cahir, he was friendly with the Baldwins, who had a tannery in the town.
There was a Mrs. Keating who had little information on that he would have known as well, and he would have visited her, and she was quite an influential woman, it seems. And Mrs. Keating would promote his products, and he'd sell his products on those occasions. And he befriended them, and he stayed with them. Every time he was in Cahir, he stayed with them.
I only recollect thinking him a handsome, interesting youth when I was a child staying with my grandmother, Mrs. Keating, in Cahir. She, poor old lady, had a great respect for this little genteel foreigner, as she used to call him.
He was very successful. He was a good communicator, obviously. He learned the language pretty fast. And he was ambitious. He wasn't going to stay a peddler. He was going to go on and get into business, and he did.
At that time, the local lord and landowner in Cahir was a very recently and very young married couple, the Lord and Lady Cahir. And they, along with the younger Keatings and Baldwins, became part of the young Italian social circle.
These teenage bride and groom, Richard and Emily, became the Baron and Baroness of Cahir. So they went from the equivalent of, having nothing, £15,000 a year, which would be about 3 or 4 million a year now, and they were installed in Cahir House. So it became party central. And artists and musicians, it was a cauldron. It was just this melting pot for youngsters. And so this buzz was going on around Cahir, and that whole period seems to be formative in Bianconi's development,
It is said that one of this group, Julia Burke, persuaded him to set up shop and start gilding. His first major job was in the church in Cahir. From there, he opened his first shop in nearby Carrick-on-Suir in 1806, near the castle, and from then on to Waterford, where he advertised as
Charles Bianconi, gilder and print seller, informs all ladies and gents that he executes all kinds of gilding in oil and burnished gold, equal to any person in this country, and on moderate terms.
I frequently worked from 6 o'clock in the morning until 2 hours after midnight, with the exception of 2 hours for dinner and recreation.
This time in his life would be notable with his meeting and friendship of Edmund Rice, the founder of the Christian Brothers educational movement, and with Father Matthew, the father of the temperance movement. Both these men would be helped by Bianconi for the rest of his career.
Having spent 2 years in Waterford, where I made myself more proficient in the mechanical part of my profession, and also improved my means, I went to Clonmel.
At this time when Bianconi is setting up his business, we have a growth. So a town like Clonmel, the number of businesses is growing, the population is growing, and prior to the famine, we are seeing that it is a time of definitely excitement and raising expectations, and this is the context for which he's developing this business.
Bianconi eventually takes the corner shop beside the main guard and gets to work.
My father soon began to employ assistants in his business. He had in his employment 3 Germans, one of whom was a woman, and there was also Pat O'Neill, who afterwards came to be head clerk in the car office.
His business prospered and he made many friends, among them a rising politician he met in Dublin, Daniel O'Connell, with whom he would have a close relationship until Daniel's death.
By this time my father's business was firmly established, and he felt himself quite at home in Clonmel. He was elected one of a society for visiting the sick poor, and by an annual payment of 3 guineas, he made himself a member of the House of Industry. His name, Charles Bianconi, became metamorphosed into Brian Cooney, Brian of the Corner.
About this time, the government began to subsidise the Allied armies on the continent, and there were demands by the banks for gold. Bianconi, already dealing in gold for the gilding trade, was approached to possibly buy up guinea gold coins that local people may have saved, that were now worth more than their face value, a point of profit for both Bianconi and the banks.
The Loyalists became alarmed at his proceedings and began to circulate the report that Bianconi, the foreigner, was buying up bullion to send secretly to Bonaparte. The country people, however, who admired Bonaparte, because he was the enemy of England, parted with their guineas readily, believing that they were thereby helping Boney.
Opportunities for business arose many times in his life, but what sets Bianconi apart is the speed with which he grasps them. His next was the end of the Napoleonic War, and suddenly many fine horses were now available cheaply on the open market, as well as the hay and oats to feed them. With the profit from his guinea sales, he bought some horses and a car. He then decided it was time to put to the test his long-held idea of providing cheap transport between local towns, something he said had grown out of his shoulders carrying his backpack all those years ago.
When he first came to Clonmel, the tradesmen and small shopkeepers, if they had business to transact, would walk to Waterford and back, about 28 Irish or 33 English miles. Coaches were not so common then, and their charges were too high to make them of general use to the ordinary traveller.
There is a mercantile class, there is a business class, and that is the one that's growing. So that would have been the cohort that Bianconi is really targeting. They need to be able to travel from town to town. They need to be able to get different products and produce, and they need to just have meetings. They can't walk 30 kilometers in a day. That'll take the entire day. And they can afford a penny or whatever the cost is for that trip. It makes sense for them.
The roads of Ireland were on the whole good, being at the time quite equal, if not superior, to most English roads. These facts were known to everybody, but there was yet no person of thought or enterprise of capital in the country who thought of putting the things together, horses, cars and roads, and thereby remedying a great public inconvenience.
On July 6, 1815, he ran his first car, available for 6 passengers, the 8 miles from Clonmel to Cahir, for a penny farthing a mile. He chose this route because it was possible to go there and back in one day, and therefore the best demonstration of the advantages over walking.
And he knew that journey from Cahir to Clonmel. He knew exactly what time it would take him, how many journeys he could make in a day. And it was a comfortable journey for him and for his horses, and he planned his first route on his own experience.
People did not know what to make of Bianconi's car when it was first started. There were, of course, the usual prophets of disaster. Many thought that nobody would pay 18 pence for going to Cahir by car when they could walk there for nothing. There were others who thought that Bianconi should have stuck to his shop.
Certainly for the first few trips, there were no takers at all. In part 2, we will see just how astute a businessman Charles Bianconi could be, and how he would overcome the local reluctance to try something new.